Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey. Today's episode with Patrick is a very helpful one because he is vulnerable as well as provides tactical steps. We talk about how he is winning at home. He's very admittedly, like all of us, not crushing it every single day, but he has some tips and guidance for all of us that's helpful. Their company has God in their values, and so talks about what that looks like from the employee standpoint as well as when they go out to market. Talk about having healthy conflict in the office. I really enjoyed the part where we started when I asked him the question of what does he do now that he wished he would have done earlier in his life? And that was a great discussion, very helpful and even eye-opening for myself as I think about a few different things. This episode is very helpful. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. On to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey Carlson. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. Today I'm joined by Patrick Wathen, who is president of Equity, a commercial real estate company headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. They are in 8 different offices, have grown to 200 people. And what is interesting about the company is within their values, they talk about honoring God. And so there's strong faith. He's also married, has 3 kids. So he is winning at work, winning at home. Wanted to have him on the podcast to talk about how he's doing that and how to help all of us do the same. So Patrick, thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. And, that introduction makes it sound like I've got it figured out, which is pretty dangerous. I'd say I'm attempting to win at home and work at the same time, but that's what we're here to talk about.
Patrick, what is that key trait to win at work and win at home?
I think for me, it's kind of 2 things that go hand in hand as an answer to that, and it's humility and respect. And the reason why I say hand in hand is that in both situations, there's going to be somebody, hopefully in the room, that's smarter than you. Acknowledging that, I think, is really key too, and goes hand in hand with respecting those opinions of others. One of the things that I struggle with both in the office, and then I can talk about the transition to home and trying to adapt to that, is I like to say the things that I think, and I like to think I'm pretty smart, and that sometimes gets in the way where I could jump on somebody else's idea. I've got to deliberately hold myself back from finishing somebody else's sentence when I think I know where they're going. So, but respecting those teammates, everyone puts a really significant effort into trying to build that team. One of our kind of core philosophies at Equity that I kind of inherited from my dad is always trying to hire people that are smarter than you. So if we actually are trying to do that, then you've got to respect those people, be humble, let them do what you brought them in to do, and then empower them. And then kind of taking those traits to the success at home is sometimes I spend my day, I don't want to say telling people what to do, right? But in large part, I can make decisions. We can go, right? We can have a conversation. We get input. And as a team, we're like, all right, we're going this direction. We made a decision and we go. Transitioning to the home front, where in large part, extremely blessed that my wife really leads our family at home. And sometimes I've got a little bit of an abrupt gear shift where I'm used to dictating some things and I've got to just step back, respect that process. And I'd say, at home, you've got a little bit of a different set of stakeholders than you do in the office, but it's really just all about that mindset and again, kind of bringing that humility and that respect to those constituents you're engaging with in either situation.
A few years ago, I don't know if it was brought to my attention or just I started to pay attention on my own about finishing other sentences. And I remember doing it with Holly, thinking, hey, I'm going to finish the sentence to show that I've been listening. I've been listening kind of all week, or I've heard the different pieces of the story, so I'm going to show respect. And that backfired. Where now I'm working on not finishing the sentences and trying to be patient as heck to hear it. And have you noticed that to be true as well for you?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'll probably share the link with her, but if my wife listens, I want to make sure she knows that this is still a work in progress. This is not something that's been figured out, but where in large part for her too, because we're fortunate that she's watching our three kids during the day, that sometimes it's just that she just wants to tell the story to an adult and, to her partner in life. And that if I try to cut it off because I think I know where it's going, that's really showing a great amount of disrespect for engaging with her in that moment, in that story, and whatever the situation is. So I think we've had similar experiences. The good news at work is that I've got actual kind of peer reviewed feedback that's indicated that's a problem for me. At home, I've had to learn a little bit the harder way.
Do you guys do peer review feedback? Since you are president of sales, most of your reviews are probably you doing reviews for your direct reports. But do you have something where you get a 360 review?
We just recently did a 360 review process where we had our direct reports review us, and then our kind of others in the organization and some people outside the organization. And in large part, it told me some things I already know, but it also helped reinforce some of those things and the importance of them. Even if I know what a weakness is, because I've been into kind of Myers-Briggs and personality testing, all these, there's 1,000 different assessments you can do. To get that feedback, even if you already know it's a weakness, just reinforces that it's something that you need to work on or be cognizant of. And then we always do, kind of through, I think it's through our best places to work application process, right? We get feedback generally as a company, but the 360 thing is the first time we've kind of gotten direct personal feedback on each of our leaders of our divisions. And that's been a really interesting growth process for us.
What have you seen to be the greatest growth out of it?
I think really that awareness, and then conversations collectively where we, kind of bare our souls to a certain extent to the other members of the exec team or our management team and say, hey, here's my three biggest flaws according to all of you and others in the organization. And then here's some action steps maybe that I can take to try to address them. Honestly, if I could have a checkup like that, probably once a year to say, hey, here's how things are doing, almost like a health checkup. I think that'd be a really valuable thing.
I completely agree. Do you and your wife kind of do a health checkup, if you will? Talk about, family visions, or talk about things that are working well, not working, or, have you done anything that's kind of more strategic in that process?
Early in our marriage, probably like a lot of people, we did the love languages kind of thing, which, that was pretty helpful. I think most of our engagements around those things are more organic. I think, necessary for that environment. My wife wouldn't like if I scheduled a meeting at 7:00 to sit down and review an agenda of stuff. So, but we do talk pretty openly about those things. My wife's also not shy about, I don't want to say telling me where I mess up, but I figure that out pretty quickly.
Shifting gears a little bit, talk about the values of your company. You've got a variety of different values, but the one I want to zoom in on is honor God. We seek to honor God with everything that we do. And putting God in the vision or values to some is a risk. There's many people who have strong faith, but they just never made the vision and values for fear of losing business or impacting employees. But you guys have done it and very bold about it. It's on the website. It's something you and I talked about in our very first discussion. So it's top of mind as well.
Yeah. And we haven't had you up to our office in Columbus yet, but you'll walk in and you'll see it on the wall, taking up a big chunk of real estate on our wall with our other values, kind of a brand wall that we have in our lobby. And those things you articulated are very real, right? The way you view that as a risk, the way you view it as kind of a vulnerability to a certain extent. And I would say, and you'll hear this a lot in this conversation, I would credit my father with putting that on the wall. When he founded the company, he was bold enough, at the time he was the only person that was at the company, but to put that into our values and into the DNA of the organization. And the interesting thing is that for us, it's really a source of the other values that we have. Like, why would absolute integrity matter? Everyone has integrity as part of their values statement, right? If you're a company in America, you got to be trusted and, have to have integrity. But why? And so when we think about our why as a family, and we're fortunate as a family business, not a publicly traded company or some larger corporate entity, it is a risk, but it's also who we are personally, and it's also our why. And so that's how I articulate it to people is, if someone asks a question, and this has come up in interviews before and things like that, where someone's trying to figure out, is this a cult? Is this, they have forced Bible studies, or, we going to be fed some kind of Kool-Aid here? And it's none of that. It's just us being authentically who we are and saying to people that this faith matters to us. To us, that's a source of these other values of why would we want to do more? Why would we want to do good? Why would we we often boil down our values into saying that we'll always do the right thing no matter the circumstance. Why does that matter to us? And it's because we're holding ourselves to a higher standard, and a standard that we'll never reach, but one that we're striving for. And, I don't think we've had, to the risk piece of that. I don't know that I could say we've lost any business because of it. I can tell you that the more we lean into that, it seems like the more doors that are opened to us. Not to say there's not still challenges or traps or speed bumps. There's a lot of that. That's, I guess, part of life. But I think our confidence in it, our desire to be bold with it has been growing, even to the extent, and I'd credit my brother largely with being kind of a spiritual leader or a catalyst for our family, but where he's challenged us on it. And where even hearing my dad, who's had that on our wall for 34 years, hearing the way he articulates it has gotten a little bolder, which has been really cool as a family unit. And I know I've probably rambled and you've got 3 more questions you might want to ask at this point, but one other thing I'd tell you as a family business is that it creates total alignment for us. So for myself, and I guess for clarity for people that, I'm talking a lot about family in this. My father founded the company in 1987. I've been in the business full-time since 2007. My brother's been in the business full-time since maybe 2012 or something like that. But when I see other family businesses, oftentimes there's challenges or there's strife for these other things. And we don't have any of that because of that alignment around honor God and what that means to us at a much deeper level.
Just a little pushback on that, and a good way just to understand maybe how you guys operate a little bit better is, total alignment on honoring God. I get, but I also know many people honor God and are Republican. Others are Democrats. Others are all about the vaccine. Others are no vaccine. All mask, no mask. I mean, on and on. But everyone's still honoring God, but just here differently.
Yeah.
So how have you guys honor God, but yet navigate differences? You have 8 offices. Maybe someone wanted to take the 8 a different location, and then someone else said, we want to go this direction. I mean, there are things that you guys are doing that you're going to have some differences. So how have you honored God, still yet have healthy conflict, and still come to decisions when there are differences in the room?
Yep, that's an awesome question. And part of it, I guess I would say, is relates to how I view Jesus and how he interacted with people, right? And that is that he did not go to everybody that had it all figured out and just say, hey guys, we're all good here and you're in my club and we're good. He went to all of the people, right? He was there for anyone of any class or any strife or any situation. And I largely would say that we try to have that same kind of open arm inclusivity, because everybody is different. Even when we look the same, we're different, right? And you reference what's in your heart, what's in your mind, your view about things. And we welcome, people of any background. We've got people of no faith, people of differing faiths in our organization. And I hope we continue to grow that, because if we ever get to the point where we're saying we want only more of us, right? We lose diversity of thought. We'll lose those other better opinions. We'll lose the ability to strengthen each other through that challenge. And we have what we would call healthy tension. We have that pretty regularly in our organization. And if we lose that, we'll stop improving, I think. So we try to foster a very candorous environment as well, where someone, they shouldn't have to guess what I'm thinking, because I should feel comfortable telling them what I'm thinking, right? And it doesn't mean you don't deliver stuff with love and respect, because that's how people want to be dealt with. So, and how they deserve to be dealt with, per my, kind of my first comment around respecting others and maintaining some humility. But if we ever get to the point where we've closed ourselves off and we're like going to be an organization where we only have Christians that go to church every Sunday and blah, blah, blah in our organization, we will have totally missed the boat from my perspective.
Great response. And part of respect is, in fact, giving truth and grace. Respecting them if they are an employee not doing great, then it's time to kind of step up the game and challenge them in that way. It's that tension of truth and grace with each of your employees and how you kind of navigate those different tensions.
Well, and for them with us, right? Which is, it's a much harder ask. It takes a lot of boldness for somebody to come tell someone that's an owner of the company that they're doing it wrong. But we desperately need that. And if we can't have that, again, we'll end up going off a cliff because Patrick thinks all Patrick's ideas are great, and that's never going to be the case. Some of them are good, got some good ideas, but no, we need that if we're going to be successful at all the things we're trying to do.
Patrick, part of my story is this, idea where I heard you need to hand over your story for a greater story. And so for you, as I say that phrase, is there a time in your life where doing it Patrick's way wasn't working and it was time to hand it over to God and start living out his story and you being, a character in his story?
Yeah, I would say we don't have enough time on the podcast for all the things where I've gone off track. I had a similar epiphany that I would articulate almost in exactly the same way a couple of years ago. I'm a prolific journaler, and it's not just meetings, although if you've had a meeting with me, you will see me writing probably a lot. That's one of the ways I process things when I'm dealing with a challenge, whether that's work, personal, becomes kind of a prayer journal too of what am I asking for? What am I seeking? Which almost every single time is just wisdom, discernment. I mean, the amount of decisions that we have to make every day that affect the people in our organization and our customers is a lot. But that kind of epiphany as I was journaling was realizing that I was always asking for help with my plan. And pretty consistently, I mean, even since I was a kid, and I think maybe some of it was, ask and you shall receive. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm asking for stuff, but it was, help me with this test, help me with this meeting, help me with this, whatever it is, and not really seeking what is God's plan for me, for my life, for this company, for the people we're serving. And so just starting to ask that question, I still may have, I'd say, kind of a topic du jour, kind of some issue we're dealing with that I am going to ask for help with, but seeking first that plan to try to be on the right path first and foremost, and then dealing, so I'd say almost that's kind of the strategic piece, and the tactical is still the day-to-day concerns and challenges. But trying to realign that thinking, I still struggle with that just because it's easy to get bogged down in whatever your personal challenges are, or, a meeting goes sideways and, whatever the case may be. But again, kind of a very similar but different way to articulate what you said, which was, trying to follow God's plan, not your own plan, or figure out where that is.
So seeking first his plan, when I try to do that at different times, is I want to seek your plan, God, what is the plan? And then I don't hear anything, or it feels quiet. It feels literally quiet in my quiet time. So I'm like, well, fine, we'll go with my plan. And so, Lord, help me with these things on my plan. I know you probably are somewhat guilty of that as well, but you may be even more intentional about listening in for God's plan for you. What does that look like on your quiet times?
One, I'm really bad at listening in that way. So a lot of times it's the people around me that are put in my path. I would say that's one of the by far greatest blessings in my life, is people within the organization and outside of the organization that offer up that wisdom when it's needed, or where I already had a lunch meeting scheduled with a certain person 2 months in advance, but they happened to have the words that I needed for that problem I was dealing with that day. I also largely think that the success or failure of certain things that we're pursuing oftentimes are corrections to try to get us in the direction we're supposed to be going. If you start doing something and it's bearing fruit, I think that's reinforcement that you're on the right path, versus when we become stubborn, and I'm really, really stubborn, and you bang your head against the wall, and then you know what you do? You try it again, because this is a really good idea I have, and this really should work. And, I figured it out. And you start to use I a lot, or I start to use me a lot, or my, and that's usually not it. But again, that kind of stubborn, and some of it's I referenced, I think it was maybe before we got on the call, but because I'm left-handed, someone told me last week I'm in my right mind. And oftentimes I think that I'm like, oh, well, I've got this figured out. I'm analytical. We looked at the data. We made this decision. It should work. So I try to be mindful of that. That's again, something that within the context of our family, we can have an open conversation of, hey guys, we set out to do this, but this is really hard, or this isn't going the way we thought it was. Should we be paying attention to that? Are we still on the right track? Do we need to adjust? And have that kind of willingness to admit that whatever idea we had or whatever path we were on might not be the right one, and we're supposed to go a different direction.
The I versus your statement was a great reminder. A Bible verse over the last year that's been super impactful to me is the parable of the 10 minas. And the parable of the 10 minas is very similar to the parable of the talents. But for, I'd say, a decade, I've looked at a lot the parable of the talents, because it's a lot about what the 5 capitals is based off, which you and I briefly talked about before, where it's spiritual, relational, physical, intellectual, and financial. But what's interesting that in that parable, those 3 servants, when the master comes back to talk to them, they all say, "Look what I did." But then on the parable of the 10 minas, when the master came back, it said, "Look what your mina did." On both those, the third servant still buried his, like in the other story. But it's just interesting. And the master rewarded them much more handsomely, much in that parable of the 10 minas than in the other parable. That meant so much. I'm actually looking up. I've got a plaque in a nice wood custom sign that I made for my office that says "Your mina, not mine," because I need that reminder to always think about your, not I. And I'm sure even today's prayers is a little too much I. So I'm still a work in progress, big time.
Totally. And when you see success, so what I was just talking about is you see challenges or failure, and maybe that helps redirect. But even more so when you have success, recognizing the source of that success and not letting that feed your own ego or hubris or taking credit. And minimally, when we approach things from a servant leadership perspective, right, we want credit first and foremost to go to the people that are achieving that thing, and avoid the temptation to say I achieved something. It never is I. If it's dependent on I, we're done already. We're not going to achieve anything. I mean, we need dozens, if not hundreds, of people all pulling together to achieve the vision that we have. And so it can't be about I or we or me. Rather, it should be we. And that's not just cheesy motivational poster stuff of no I in team either. I mean, that's the reality, especially when you start to get to a point where there's just no bandwidth left either. So if there's supposed to be 2 or 3 more things achieved this week, unless we collaborate as a team, they're just not going to happen. If it's dependent on me, again, we're done.
Mm-hmm. You're president of sales, or president of the company with 200 employees. I had a similar role where I was president of sales, and there's different days where you've got to be the one to motivate and inspire and encourage, and you just may not feel it as much. How do you remind yourself God's in control? How do you kind of remind yourself to continue to get up and lead when the quarter's tough, or the month you're having a bad month, or commercial real estate everyone thought was going to fall out during COVID, and that story's still yet to be told. I mean, the end of the story.
Largely for me, there's 2 things to answer that question, and there's plenty of times where I'm also naturally introverted, so investing time in leading and motivating people takes a lot of emotional energy and engagement for me. But one is kind of laying my burden down. I mean, that's one of those things where when I'm overburdened, it's because I've forgotten to pray about it, and that almost palpable feeling of the weight off your shoulders is recognizing we're not doing it alone. And then the other piece of that is I'll reference other people a lot in this. I'll reference my brother a lot, is that I had a situation last week where I was basically done. I was like, it was, forget this. I can't engage further. And to have someone kind of riding shotgun with you to say, hey, just take a step back, breathe, pray, where again, I can say we're not alone. I can say, hey, Jesus, help me with this burden, but I can also have someone around me that's right there, that's saying the same thing, that's helping shoulder it. And for that matter, our entire exec team is like that here. I mean, from a kind of culture standpoint, or, people I could trust with anything, where I could say, hey, I need help with this. And I know I've got somebody that's going to step right in there with me. So even if I don't have to make that ask, knowing that I could and that there's somebody there waiting to help is always a huge reassurance and a motivator. And frankly, being around those people encourages me to try to step up even when I don't want to.
Your point number one, Matthew 11, talking about my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I think that is a fantastic reminder. But even the second one, what I like about that is that step back. I think as leaders, so often where we make mistakes is we think we've got to make the decision now. Let's go, 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 go. I read a book years ago called Lead Yourself First. And what was so neat about it was there were so many stories where people actually thought, hey, I'm going to sleep on this. I'm going to make this decision tomorrow. And examples in the story were military examples, like at war, and a general would say, I'm going to sleep on it. One of the stories at the very end is Martin Luther King, before I Have a Dream, talks about how he sat around the kitchen table, had conversations, and almost, and then had made some thoughts and then slept on it for that night of what he's going to do. And I think just having that wisdom and the patience to take a step back, breathe, talk to some others, as opposed to go, go, go. There are some decisions that we need to go. I get it. We can't hit pause and sleep on every decision.
Yeah.
It'd take forever. Yeah, we'd have a lot of naps. That's right.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I think it's almost any time where if you're starting to feel that frustration or that agitation or unsettling, where that's a sign that you've got to take a step back, or sometimes, and we've got a beautiful campus here, and I go for a walk, like take 10 minutes, go walk around outside, get some fresh air, and then reattack whatever the problem is, or shift gears and come back to it. And that goes hand in hand with, kind of simple business rules, like don't email angry, right? Where what you want to do in that moment probably isn't going to be the best decision for you, the customer, your people, et cetera. But it's hard. You're right? You referenced that at the beginning of that comment, that your burden of leadership, you feel like you're supposed to make a spot judgment right now, and it's supposed to be exactly the right one with the best outcome. And that's not always, from a timing standpoint, not always when you can do that.
I had a mentor say, when you're angry, type the email in Word, so you never hit send in the email. And then the next day, take a look at that email and you realize, ooh, that was awful. I'm glad I didn't send it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I wanted to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work, and what this looks like, this book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. And then last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much. Patrick, what are you doing now as a leader, whether it's at work or at home, just your overall, personal life, that you wish you would have started sooner?
One of the things I really love is meeting someone who's expecting their first kid. So I meet someone in the business community in particular. I get the chance to bump into a lot of young people that are starting families. And I get so excited because I can tell them how I failed. And I've really worked on being open in that way, partially because it's a very common challenge. You talk about work-life balance or work-life integration or any of those things, where when you're young in your career and you're really trying to prove yourself, you can easily justify not being the father, the husband, the partner that you want to be. And you can give lip service to it. One of the things my wife references with things as giving churchy answers to things, which is, a lot of Bible studies, a lot of other situations. Like I know the right answer, and that's I prioritize my faith and my family, and then comes work. Well, you could look at the first 5 years of my fatherhood, which was the first 6 years of my marriage. We got started right away. We knew we wanted to have multiple kids. And I definitely, it was only lip service in terms of my prioritization. Work was my prioritization. Work was my worship. Work was everything. And the catch-22 of that is I could say, well, maybe I wouldn't have gotten to the position that I've gotten to now. But what I would advise people, or what I would say that I did wrong, is you can still be a little patient. You can still know that if you're doing the right things, you'll get there, and you can still free up that time for your family. It's taken me, in my mind, years of deliberate effort to repair the relationship with my oldest kid, who's now 9. And not because I did bad things when I was with her, that it weren't situations like that, but because I wasn't there. I traveled a lot. I had my peak year of travel. I think I had 34 trips, average of 2-day trips in 1 year. And that's just a lot of time gone. I was charging extremely hard because I had these quantitative goals I was trying to get. At the time, I was a commissioned salesperson, fully commissioned. So I was a real estate agent. And the only scoreboard was dollars of production. So I'm highly competitive. I went after it. I did well from a material standpoint, but that wasn't worth it in hindsight, right? If it would have taken 6 more months or 12 more months or even 5 more years to get to this point in my career, with the wisdom I have now, I would have made that decision to delay that worldly material success. I would have delayed that. And that's hard because I see a lot of myself in these, like I said, these young people, primarily men, that I end up interacting with and having this conversation to say, hey, when that kid gets there, just take the time, just slow it down. I think I took like 48 hours of paternity leave, or maybe 36. I don't know how long it was, but I was like right back to the office. What I do now is take the time whenever it's needed. So it's, staying home in the morning to watch the kids or take them to school. I don't leave for the office now until the kids are all awake. So I get to hug them and kiss them and say goodbye and tell them to be good to their mom and tell them to do good in school. That means I don't get to the office. I used to be at the office, I don't know if I ever beat my dad to work, but used to be at the office before most of the other people. And that was kind of sacred time to me because I could get my day rolling, get organized, be super productive before anybody else started the clock. But now that time is sacred to me for a different reason. And I keep that carved out. I rarely get to the office, before probably 7:30. And I used to be 6:30 or 6:45, which is leaving before anybody else is even up. So, it's making those kind of adjustments and realizing that you can still be successful. And that's what the fear is, that if I carve that time out, if I do leave early for that kid's sporting event, if I, I'm going to be there in time to pick them up from gymnastics or whatever, that I'm going to somehow lose at work. And that's not how it works.
What about the listener who's thinking, that sounds great, Patrick, but now you are a leader and not a producer on the day-to-day. Yeah. What would you tell that listener who is the commissioned real estate agent right now, who is commissioned, and they got to produce their income, they got to hit their goals, they got to hit the leaderboard so they can get the promotion? I don't disagree with what you're saying. I actually want to press into more so we can help people, because I too was the one slugging it and doing the Hampton Inns many nights a week.
I love that you're asking that question, because this is one of my frequent topics of conversation when you get the latest advice article about so-and-so's habits, right? When you're like, oh, Jeff Bezos never takes more than 3 meetings a day. And it's like, okay, he's the richest man on earth. So what does that have to do with anything? Tell me about when his business was in his garage. What was he freaking doing then, right? Like, how hard was he grinding then? Did he never start his day before 9? No, he started his day, at least I assume. I don't know. I haven't read that article yet, but I would love for someone to dig in and compare and contrast these like habits of already at the pinnacle versus getting started. And I realize it is easy for me to say now versus if you are that person that's starting out and asking that question. And I would tell you that you have to examine your priorities. You have to examine yourself and your heart. And I would suggest write it down and think about it, process through it. If you actually believe in the prioritization that you would verbalize, which I referenced that I gave lip service to that stuff, then put your money where your mouth is and carve out the time and be willing to be a little bit more patient. What I'd tell you is that you will still get to that spot. Another thing that's interesting, and this was advice I got from one of my mentors here at Equity, is that if you carve out time for God, he'll give it back to you manyfold. And this was in response to, I had lost a habit that I'd had of reading a little bit of scripture in the morning or doing some devotional. And I was complaining to this individual and saying, hey, I don't have time for that. I got too much stuff on my plate. And he just came back to me and said, no, you've got time. Just if that's actually important, you do it. And you know what? I didn't see any loss in productivity. And what's interesting is you can talk to some people about all these productivity hacks too, but like blocking out your time, or if you think about, what's the most productive time you ever have in your life? And you'd be like, well, the last couple hours before I leave on vacation, right? Because you're going to get 1,000 things done in that amount of time. So go ahead and block out on your calendar that you're going to leave for practice, or, I guess we're talking about people starting out. So you're going to go to that doctor's appointment. You're going to go to the checkup appointment where you're not maybe going to learn anything new, but you're going to be there with your wife, you're going to be there with your kid, and you're going to be invested in whatever stage of life that is. That's worth that investment. And, does that mean maybe you lose out at work? I don't actually think you do. But what I'm suggesting is that if you do, that's a very worthwhile investment. So you got to think about time as the only resource you've got. If you can invest it in closing one more deal or invested in that, family, that relationship, with the hindsight I've got now, I would have made a different decision, but totally understand that even if I was telling my 23-year-old self this stuff, I'd probably be like, yeah, right. So love that question though. It's a really good question.
I'd probably be guilty. I would be guilty of the same things of people telling me this type of stuff at a younger age or a different point in my career, because they probably were, and I probably was ignoring it and just go. But I love the tip you have of write it down. And I've said this many times before that people listening have heard it, but we control the input, God controls the impact. And I think, as you said, if we write the things down, the lead indicators we want to focus on, I need to get these amount of real estate deals done. I need to go on dates with my wife. I need to spend time with my daughter. I need to get to the gym, have these work meetings. If we write down with intentionality where we want to spend our time, fast forward to say where we're at now, you're not having to do some of this relationship repairing that you vulnerably shared with us, with your 9-year-old daughter. So thank you for sharing. Or there's marriages that people are now having to repair because they were never around, or whatever it could be. So it's at some point, the sacrifices that you're making are going to catch up to you. There's going to be some collateral damage. And so whatever that is, even now, there's listeners who are in 40s and 50s that probably need to do a little level set of where they're spending their time now, and make sure it's in the right order. So that question you ask us, are we carving out enough time for God and family, is a great one. What are you hearing from God right now?
That's a good question. I think mostly stay the course. I think we are getting, and I referenced some of those positive indicators of where you see things start to bear fruit, and it's indicating that you might be on the right track. We're seeing some of that in other areas. We're seeing some resistance, which means kind of gut checking. What's the source of that resistance? And is that because we're on the wrong path, or is it because we've got to push through? So there's always that kind of question. But we've had, I would tell you, over the last couple of years, a large pile of, I would say, in quotes, coincidences that are not coincidental in my view, that are related to things we're trying to do to magnify our impact, our kingdom impact, our community impact, both internally and externally. And when those dots connect, seemingly independent of each other, I think from a secular viewpoint, you could say, oh, well, that's a happy coincidence. And we would say, we think that's divine intervention, and that person was put in our path with that skill set or that information or that advice or their relationship to connect us to the next one. That there's some stuff that we're working on that I can't talk about publicly right now, but there's been a lot of really, really cool coincidences with a kind of side project we're working on as a family that I think shows we're on the right path. So again, I think stay the course. At least I hope that's advice, because we're staying on the course for right now with some of that stuff. But honestly, that's one of those things where, to give you a better answer, I'd have to crack open that journal and read back through the last few weeks and see what's coming up.
One thing you said, Patrick, is I want to hear your answer of, when we get resistance, we want to know the source. Do you have a checklist to figure out the source? How do you figure out the source to know, hey, we've got to push through this, or God is closing this door, we better turn and go? How do you know which it is to push through or to go a different direction?
I think maybe the first part of that for us is what is the desired outcome or the goal that we're pursuing? And, does that seem, how altruistic does that seem, or how aligned with, our mission, or we think, what God's plan would be? And when I say source, it's really, we believe that you can be a target of the enemy when you are trying to have a positive kingdom impact in this world. And so largely that's the basis for that kind of questioning of what is the source is, do we think this is just some speed bumps because we're trying to be, someone would like us to be derailed, or is this not the right direction? And it's asking those questions, especially when things get particularly tough on something that you think would have a very positive impact, is stepping back, looking at that, and having that conversation around, is this something where we do need to change course, or is this something where we need to push through? And it's hard, that discernment. Like I said, if you were to look at what would I write down as a prayer request most frequently, it'd be wisdom and discernment. It's just knowing when to make the right decision and wanting to make the right decision in each circumstance, which is impossible, but seeking that.
Very good, Patrick. What is the best way for listeners to get a hold of you?
Email. It's my first initial P and my last name, Wathen, at equity.net. You're welcome to check out equity.net. Or our construction company is ecsbuilds.com, which stands for Equity Construction Solutions. Those are kind of our two flags as a company. But yeah, anything that touches the life cycle of a commercial real estate asset or tenant is something that we've got vertically integrated, and we've done projects in 45 states. So there's probably not a circumstance you could come across where we wouldn't be able to offer you at least some kind of advice.
Great. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, sharing your wisdom, your stories, and I've enjoyed this conversation, even the previous ones we've had. So thank you very much.
No, this was awesome, Corey. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at corymcarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.